All right, let's welcome in our guest, Chris Vannini, senior college football writer for The Athletic and co-host of the Until Saturday podcast alongside David Ubben and Damian Harris. Chris, it's a pleasure having you on, man.
Yeah, good to be here, man.
Well, now we're going to move on here, Chris, to the other semifinal game, the Cotton Bowl, which will be played in Dallas on Friday night between the Buckeyes and the Longhorns, Texas and Ohio State. Another fantastic, classic uniform helmet matchup here in this matchup. I love it. Tyler and I are big uniform aficionados here.
Of course, me too.
But yeah, Chris, I guess since Ryan Day and Chip Kelly, they no longer seem to be twisted up like a pretzel mentally from Michigan, and they're actually unleashing their just freak athletes and elite skill players in space against defenses, and nobody can seem to stop it. They look completely unstoppable in these first two matchups at the playoffs. What can Texas do to limit the damage and avoid the Buckeye offense just going off like it has against Tennessee and Oregon?
I mean, if Ohio State plays like it has played the last two games, they're winning it all. They are the most talented team in college football. I predicted before the season they were going to go 16-0 and win it all, because there have been very rare teams in college football history with that amount of depth and veteran talent across the board. There were no weaknesses on this team. And yet, for much of the season, it was you could see it in spurts. I mean, they didn't even Marshall and Western Michigan, they didn't dominate in the way you would kind of expect. They were getting off to slow starts. They lose to Oregon. They, could have won that game, could have gone either way. But you beat Penn State on the road, you handle Indiana. It's I feel like we still haven't seen what this team can be and what we know it can be. And then the loss to Michigan just woke them up, and they were just like, F it. We're going to just air it out. We're going to throw to set up the run, which is what they should have been doing all along, because they can't run in short yardage situations because the offensive line is banged up. And boom, there you go. And Oregon and Tennessee have no idea what the heck hit them. So if you're Texas, again, line of scrimmage, Ohio State had 8 sacks against Oregon. Oregon had allowed 5 sacks total the previous 2 years, each of the previous 2 years. They just destroyed them on that line. And even that banged up offensive line dominated the line again, gave Will Howard time to find Jeremiah Smith and get open. If you can't get pressure on Will Howard, Ibuka, Jeremiah Smith, these guys are going to get open if they've got time. And so you're going to have to get pressure. That's where it's going to start. Texas has been weird. The defense is the strength of their team. The defense has not been good in the playoff. Arizona State continually moved the ball on them. Clemson consistently moved the ball on them. So I don't know. This is a really interesting matchup.
Yeah, to that point, that was kind of where I was going to go next. Is I don't know what's happened to this Texas defense, who has elite playmakers at every level of the defense. I mean, they've got the guy that won the best DB of the year. They've got multiple D linemen that can get after the quarterback and get tackles for a loss. Anthony Hill Jr. is an elite middle linebacker. And then, like you mentioned, the Clemson game, they get Cade Klubnik and those receivers throw all over them. And then Scatterbo runs all over them in the second half.
And throws on them.
And throws on them. It's interesting, because I'm of the belief that I do think that Texas does have the horses on defense to be able to possibly apply some pressure on Howard and possibly slow down that running game. But like you said, if they continue to just play like they've played, I don't know how anybody's going to stop them.
I was at the Texas-Georgia game in Austin, and Texas fell behind very quickly in that game because of some turnovers and some really bad field position. Their offensive line got dominated by Georgia's front. And Georgia's front is pretty good, but not like what it was. And it feels like a situation with Texas where, kind of like Penn State, if they are more talented than you, they're going to run all over you. And they will win that line of scrimmage. But when they've gone up against a Georgia and a team with similar talent level, it has not gone well. And I think that's what we've seen so far. So I don't know. This is kind of one of those see what you really got, Texas. Yeah, you can beat up on Arkansas and Vanderbilt and Florida and all this stuff. But in the big games, the Georgia game and stuff like that, their defense it's not been there.
Yeah, well, we've actually talked about that too, Chris, about how last year, I mean, really dating back to last year, as far as the biggest games that Texas has been in against the best competition, The last one that they won was in Tuscaloosa early in the year last year at Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
And ironically, that's the last time that Texas was an underdog, was at Alabama last year.
You can tell that's a good, but that point, you can tell Steve Sarkisian loves that they're the underdog, by the way. He said in his press conference the other day, like, nobody thinks we're going to win. Like, people are, like, he's really, I think they are really glad that people are doubting them now, because now he's got that motivation. That doesn't always come when you're at Texas. You're Texas. You're the flagship school. Like, you're expected to win. So to be in that position again, finally, for the first time since Alabama, I think they are very happy about that.
Yeah, I think you could arguably say, when we know Ohio State, like you mentioned earlier, is the most talented team in the country, but it's arguably that Texas is the second most talented team in the country across the board on both sides of the ball. Moving to the other side of the ball, to the offensive side. Sark, one of the best play callers in the game, has been for a while, but Tyler and I talk about it all the time. Quinn Ewers and this Texas offense in general, there's so many games where they leave you just with more to be desired. Like, they should be doing more with the athletes that they've got on the perimeter, with the multiple backs that they've got, great offensive line, solid quarterback in Ewers. I mean, what do you think is contributing to Texas offense being so inconsistent, especially here late in the season? I mean, they dominated in the run game against Texas A&M and Clemson, but couldn't run the rock against Georgia or Arizona State. I just, don't understand what's going on there.
I mean, that's where it starts, the running game. Like, do they have it or do they not? And it's been very, very hit or miss. They lost a couple of running backs in the preseason, and they've had games where they've been amazing on the ground and games when they've been terrible on the ground. And it's rarely in between. And that doesn't help Quinn Ewers when you don't have a good running game to go with that. So that's where it starts. They've had some injuries in the offensive line. Kelvin Banks has been in and out. The right tackle, Cam Williams, I think he missed the last game, or at least he got hurt in the first game. I think he was in and out. So that's where it starts. How healthy is your offensive line against what is a very, very good Ohio State defensive line? If you can run the ball, you're in it. If you can't, if Texas can't run the ball in this game, I don't see how they win, because I don't know if Quinn Ewers has the ability to win you the game. And I think Quinn is probably more banged up than they let on. He had that oblique injury in the middle of the season, and ever since then, he's not had zip on the throws like he used to. It never came back. And then he injured the ankle late in the season as well. So I think he's probably a bit banged up. I'm surprised we haven't seen more Arch Manning packages. We saw a little against Texas A&M, a little against Georgia at the SEC Championship, but like not more. And they haven't necessarily needed to, because the offense has done like okay. But then you see what happens at the end of the Arizona State game. 4th and 13. Quinn Ewers checks into the max protection and makes the throw that saves the game, and they win. Like, that's why Sark still rides with him, because this guy knows this offense inside and out, and you can trust him to do all those little things. So it starts with running the ball. If they can't run the ball, I don't see Texas having a chance.
Yeah, I think on the Ohio State side of the ball, there's not, obviously, after the last two games, there hasn't been too many question marks. I've been kind of
how many sacks? Like, I don't remember how many sacks they got against Tennessee, but they were constantly all over Nico in that first game. Like, the defensive line in these first two CFP games has been unrelenting.
Yeah,
I said the last episode. I mean, Jack Sawyer, JTT. I mean, Cody Simon looks like the best linebacker in football the past two games. Like, they are finally, because that defensive line, even in the first matchup against Oregon, they were just so hit or miss on whether or not they were going to be able to get any pressure.
Yep. There was a stat. I mean, there was like, but after that Oregon game, sorry to interrupt you, but there was a stretch of like of Ohio State's like last like 4 or 5 games against top 5 teams. I think they had 1 sack or something like that. Like, the defensive line in the big games was not showing up. Defensive line coach Larry Johnson was getting a lot of heat from fans because they weren't showing up in those big games, and now they are. Now they've been unbelievable. And if that is going, good luck.
Yeah, they had 13 tackles for a loss. Like you mentioned, 8 sacks against Oregon. They had 13 tackles for a loss in that game, too.
I think it's like negative 20-something rushing yards is what Oregon ended up with.
Yeah, it was nuts.
Yeah, and I've been dogging on Will Howard kind of all season. Just, a lot of comparisons to him and Kyle McCord, obviously with the season McCord put up at Syracuse and how he got kind of run out of there, blamed, for the loss last year. But Howard has showed up big time in the playoffs. He's got a QBR of over 98 between the two games. He's averaging over 300 per game now. They're finally opening up the offense. He is going to go against kind of on paper what is, obviously Lance, said the DB of the year and a good secondary, but
yeah, Jahdae Barron. for
yeah,
Texas.
we saw what Cade Klubnik did to him. And you got to think that Will Howard and just kind of how they're rolling, he's going to duplicate that.
Yeah, I mean, Texas's pass defense, I think, is statistically like number one in the country. But like you watch the Arizona State game, like Sam Leavitt was probably the better quarterback in that game. And Arizona State was constantly moving into.
He's a dog.
He was constantly moving into. They'd get inside the 40-yard line and then they'd sputter. And I'm curious about Texas with that too, because Texas's red zone offense is not good, and you can't be kicking field goals in this game. You're going to finish drives. But Will Howard. Ohio State, like he was their guy from the beginning in the portal last year. Like there wasn't like a whole process of who we're going to figure out. Like they wanted him. He was the guy because Kansas State was moving on to Avery Johnson. And I mean, Will Howard has been really good this season. If you look at the numbers, the accuracy, the completion percentage, I want to say he has like 4 or 5 games over 70 or 80% completions. It's there. It was there in the Penn State game, but he also threw an interception, a pick six, in that game. So in the biggest moments, he hadn't yet really like taken over a game himself. And now they have. And I really think it's because they're passing to set up the run and they're letting Will Howard do his thing. And then the running game is complementing that and it's opening everything up. And they're giving him and they're protecting him. I mean, the offensive line was destroyed against Michigan because they had just lost their starting center, I think, that week, on top of having a couple of guys gone. So that was maybe a really bad time to lose your center going up against Michigan that week. But the offensive game plan now is just clearly different, and they're utilizing his strengths. He feels great. He's been a really good player this season, and now he's been a great player. And if you get that kind of play out of Will Howard again, you're probably winning it all.
One might say that Chip Kelly and Ryan Day was really holding him back this year, letting him be more of a game manager, and then they finally turn him loose here in the playoffs. I saw a stat the other day, guys, that he's like 7 of 9 in these first 2 games in the playoffs on throws of 20-plus yards downfield. That's like that travel more than 20 air yards. That's insane so far. Well,
yeah,
Chris, tell us, man, what do you think each of these teams need to do to win this game?
Texas, you got to run the ball. And Ohio State, just got to avoid turnovers, avoid negative plays. Don't set up Texas in good field position and stuff like that. Ohio State's favored by I think 6 or 6.5.
Yep, 6.5.
I'm picking Ohio State. I had picked Oregon to win it all, so now I got to change it up. But I mean, Ohio State, if they play like they've been playing, nobody's beating them.
Right.
But we'll see. And so I'm going to go with Notre Dame and Ohio State.
Okay. Chris, can't thank you enough, man, for coming on, discussing these 2 semifinal matchups that are sure to be great games this week. Let the people know one more time where they can find you online, where they can read and listen to your stuff.
Yep, theathletic.com for all of our very deep college football playoff coverage there. The Until Saturday podcast with me, David Ubben, and former Alabama running back Damian Harris. And at Chris Vannini on pretty much any social media that you use.
Awesome. Can't thank you enough again, man. Had a lot of fun talking about it. Let's do it again soon.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, guys.
Man, that was fantastic. Loved having Chris on. That was awesome that he took time to come just talk some ball with us, talk some semifinal action with us. Love what some of his takes and what he had to say in regards to the games. Obviously he was big on talking about the line of scrimmage play and who's going to make the least amount of mistakes, which obviously is what happens when you have bigger games like this, when you have opponents, especially in the Notre Dame-Penn State game where not much separates the 2 opponents from each other. Usually comes down to who can make the explosive plays, who can prevent the other from making explosive plays, who can win the line of scrimmage, and who's going to force mistakes and make the least amount of mistakes. And guys, seriously, like if you're not following Chris on X, you need to do that. You also need to go check out his work at The Athletic. I mean, his articles are fantastic. The guy is just he's a ball knower, well-versed in the college football world. But we were lucky and blessed to have him come on and just chop it up with us here today, weren't we, Tyler?
Yes, sir. It was pretty awesome. How about you and I chop it up a little bit on these games here? The Cotton Bowl, 7:30 p.m. on Friday night. Between Ohio State and Texas. Ohio State 6-point favorites over the Longhorns. Ryan Day 64-6 straight up as a favorite. Both teams played on New Year's Day. Ryan Day's 46-6 on equal rest as his opponent. He's 55-8 after a win. He's 20-9 against ranked opponents. Remind me again why people wanted this guy fired, just because he couldn't beat the team in the maize and blue. Sark at Texas. Well, go ahead. Sark in Texas. He's 1-5 straight up as an underdog, and he's only 4-5 at neutral site games, 3-6 against the spread in those games, 12-11 against ranked opponents. We talked a lot over the past couple episodes, and we just talked with Chris about Texas when they are, playing a big opponent like this. The last kind of marquee win they've had was Alabama in week 2 of 2023. So that's a long time ago. And he said that he thinks that Sark is absolutely relishing the fact that they're in the underdog spot, for once.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm going to say this again too, because we have some people sometimes that get mad at us when we say like, "Oh, Sark hasn't won a big game." They've been in big games. Like, again, we're talking about when the deck of cards is stacked evenly or maybe slightly against him. Like, yes, the Big 12 championship game last year against Oklahoma State. That's obviously a big game, but they were favored by like double digits against Oklahoma State. They obviously were a significantly more talented, better football team than Oklahoma State. Okay, Arizona State, yes, that was a college football playoff game and a big game, okay? But they were a double-digit favorite and had significantly more talent across the board than Arizona State. That's not what we're saying. We're not saying those weren't big games and good wins, okay? This game against what looks like to be like an unstoppable Space Force or something, more on that here in a minute with Ohio State, like this game, the Bama game last year in Tuscaloosa where he won and clapped those Bama cheeks in Tuscaloosa, much to my dismay. And that's the type of games that we're taught. Washington in the Sugar Bowl last year. Okay, now we'll move on. So I'll say this, man. I think that Texas, I'm going to start off with this. I think Texas is more like well-equipped across the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball to put up a fight and possibly win this game against Ohio State. Not taking anything away from Oregon. Oregon, again, number 1 team in the country. They were elite, all that. But I think Texas is better across the – I don't even think it's really a question. I think Texas along the defensive front has more difference makers along the front with Colin Simmons and Trey Moore and Barron Sorrell and Anthony Hill Jr. at the linebacker position. I mean, like I mentioned to Chris a minute ago, Jahdae Barron won the best DB award in the country. They've got elite level talent and great players at every level, similar to how Ohio State is. Ohio State at every level of their defense. Like, it's not that they've just got a dominant defensive line. I mean, Simon at linebacker and obviously their corners and but 2 of the best safeties in the country. I mean, they've got elite level play at all levels of their defense. So does Texas. So I do think that talent-wise, Ohio State really, man, is just, correct me if I'm wrong, they've just really overwhelmed the first 2 teams that they've played with their talent. I mean, the most talented roster in the country has been playing like a freaking angry, hungry grizzly bear that hasn't eaten in forever. That's how they've been playing. Texas is going to have to match that like intensity. Texas is going to have to go to that borderline like dark place in your head to come out and play like an angry, pissed off like bear that hasn't eaten in months, like Ohio State's been playing. That's just really what they've been doing with the most talented roster in the country.
Yeah. Let's break it down. Let's start there. When Ohio State has the ball, number 6 scoring offense versus number 3 scoring defense. Texas defense is number 12 against the rush. Ohio State, though, we've seen it in the past 2 games, and it's worked magnificently. They clearly want to use that passing game to open up the running game, which is a complete 180 from what they were trying to do the first 12 weeks of the season. And we know that Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, one of the best 1-2 punches in the game. And that's the thing, though. If Ohio State comes out and they can get the ball moving through the air, that will open up that rushing game against that Texas D.
Yeah, and again, I'm just going to say, I don't think that Ohio State is going to have the same success up front this offensive line, who obviously had issues, we all know it's well documented throughout the year with a lot of the injuries that they had, trying to, use a makeshift, piece things together, different offensive line. They had a lot of time to prepare for the playoffs to be able to try to figure that out. They obviously look like that they have. But again, I think that this Texas defensive front is too talented
Well, it would
too
help if
good.
they got off the field because against Arizona State, they played for 97 plays.
Yep.
Compared to 60 for the Texas offense. So, I mean, get off the field.
Yeah. And I promise you, there's plenty of people listening to this that are going to be like, well, that Texas defense didn't look so tough against Arizona State. I agree. Yeah. They didn't. I have no idea.
Or Clemson.
Oh, yeah, they did. I have no idea what's happened these last couple of weeks. And maybe it is. Maybe it is that they just played better offenses these last 2 weeks, and maybe the Texas defense
maybe
isn't
the
as
SEC
good.
offenses weren't anything to write home about.
Maybe so, and that could be the case. But I don't personally think that. I think this Texas defense does have dudes, and I just think that they're too talented. Like, some people are talking about this. I'm just going to go there. Some people are talking about this game, man, like this is like a David versus Goliath type game. I get it. I mean, I understand because of how Ohio State's been playing. But, dude, the power of your back against the wall, the little old who would have thought the little old underdog story, Texas, with all the talent that they've got. Think about that. That's an elite coaching staff there in Austin. Yeah. They've got some dogs on that team. And we've seen Ohio State, when you have a bunch of really talented football players who feel slighted, and who have that us against the world mentality, the Ohio against the world stuff that Ohio State does, that's exactly the type of stuff Texas is going to be doing this week. Now, can they do anything about it? Can they do anything about it? We're going to see. So where you want to start, on the offensive, defensive side?
Yeah, just continuing on when Ohio State has the ball, like I mentioned, with Chris, I've been, I guess you can call it a Will Howard hater this year. And, in my defense, he hasn't looked like he has the last 2 weeks throughout the regular season. And maybe they were holding him back. Like you said, maybe they were hiding him a little bit, keeping some of this stuff close to the vest for the playoffs. I don't think that's the case. I don't know what was going on, but he's absolutely playing his butt off in the playoffs. Like I said, 315 a game and a 98.2 QBR. That's out of 100, folks. This isn't like a 158.3 quarterback rating. This is a 98.2 QBR rating. Big question is can Hill and Simmons create pressure off the edge?
Yeah, I think they can. And I think that they can get pressure up the middle too. But again, the way that Howard has been they've been scheming it to where they get the ball out of his hands quick.
Yeah.
I mean, he's just dropping back. He's not standing back there forever. Even on some of those deep balls. I mean, it's like, 1, 2, 3, plant that back foot, let it rip. Obviously that helps when you've got Jeremiah Smith and Ibuka in that bunch that can get open like they can, that you're not having to wait for them to get open. But can the Texas DBs, can they hold up? It's going to be a great matchup there. I think that this is going to – I just don't think that Ohio State's going to be able to line up with Henderson and Judkins and be able to run the ball necessarily as well as they ran it these first 2 games. But really, those 2 guys, it's not that they're doing kind of like Notre Dame did against Georgia or kind of like Penn State's done with Allen and Singleton. It's not your 4 or 5 yard type, the ones that just slowly, death by 1,000 cuts. It's not that type of run game that Ohio State's been using. It's explosive plays. You look at it and Judkins and Henderson may have a 2-yard run, a 3-yard run, maybe a 4-yard run, 2-yard run. Then all of a sudden, boom, Henderson goes for 30, 50 or more. They've got to limit the explosive plays for Ohio State. Ohio State has come out in the first quarter in these first 2 playoff games and has put together 2 of the best quarters of football you'll ever want to see.
And basically, honestly, it's the first drive. I mean, too, they just absolutely blitzed Oregon. They did the same thing to Tennessee. If they can come out and do that same thing against Texas, you're going to know real quick.
Agreed.
We're in trouble. If Texas bows up and forces a 3-and-out or, gets the ball, punted by the 50-yard line, that's a win for Texas, obviously.
Yeah, I think if Texas can come out against this Ohio State offense early on and obviously not get just completely blitzed like Ohio State did in those first 2 games, we're going to know that we're in for a war or not early on. And so can they get pressure on Will Howard? they've got to be able to slow down something. And I think it starts there. They've got to be able to, because I think that Texas with their pass rushers, I think they're okay with I think Texas believes they've got enough difference makers on that D front that if this game turns into Will Howard trying to drop back and throw the ball a billion times, that I think that they believe that they can get enough pressure, make enough plays, maybe force a turnover or something, that they feel good about that. Where I just don't know. Again, I just don't think Jeremiah Smith is. We've talked about it too many times. I know everybody in the country is constantly talking about this guy, and rightfully so. We've been saying he's uncoverable.
Yeah.
Well, we've got the guy that won the Thorpe Award for the best defensive back in the country, Jahdae Barron. You got to think he's going to be going up against him some. Makuba, the other corner who's really good, who transferred in from Clemson. You got to think he's going to be matched up with him some too. But again, dude, even if they can somehow slow him down, you still got Ibuka. You still got Tate. That Texas front is going to have to. The best pass defense you can have is when the quarterback's on his back or when he's rushed and has to rush his throws. And can they do that? Because obviously we've seen when Ohio State has looked the most mortal and human this year is when they faced dominant defensive fronts that were able to get there. Tennessee had a dominant defensive front, and they weren't able to do anything about it.
Yeah.
Oregon has a good defensive front, maybe not as dominant as the Tennessee defensive front or the Texas defensive front. They weren't able to do anything about it.
Yeah. Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka, 70 catches each. Carnell Tate with 43 catches. That Texas secondary we saw in that Clemson game, for some reason, very susceptible, but they are a bunch of ball hawks. Barron and Makuba both have 5 picks. You got hard-hitting safety Michael Taft back there. So they do have a good secondary. For whatever reason, like we mentioned, they've just been inconsistent over the past, month or so, 3 or 4 games. So let's switch to the other side of the ball. When Texas has the ball, this is almost a tougher side for Texas, in my opinion. I mean, you talk about how when Ohio State has the ball, trying to stop them, but trying to do something against this Ohio State defense, who's number 1 scoring defense in the country. They're only allowing 12 points per game. They're number 1 in yards allowed. They're number 2 in the red zone scoring defense. They're number 2 in rush defense, which Texas has struggled. They've been wishy-washy and been flip-floppy on running the ball. They were great against Clemson. They were terrible against Arizona State. Trey Wisner's got over 100,000 yards. He didn't even play till game 5. So that's pretty impressive, to show you what they can do on the ground. But and Jaden Blue, he's a home run threat, but I just don't know what kind of Texas run game you're going to get, especially against this Ohio State defense. And that's where it all starts with me.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think that outside of Oregon, this is the best offense that Ohio State has faced as far as the overall collection of talent across the board on a single offense. It's probably, outside of Penn State, the best offensive line, as long as Texas, we don't know the health of if Texas is going to be somewhat healthy on the offensive line, it's the best offensive line they faced. But, man, I said it last game and I'll say it again. I said it going into the Rose Bowl. People were asking, can Ohio State duplicate that performance they had against Tennessee against Oregon? Obviously they did and probably did more. But the thing that can be duplicated is everything you just talked about. The thing that can be duplicated is this Ohio State defense. That defensive front, who is arguably the best in the country, Cody Simon at linebacker, Ransom and Downs at safety. I mean, arguably the 2 best safeties in college football. It's just unbelievable that Oregon, with their skilled players, just literally couldn't get open. And negative whatever yards rushing. You got to think that Sark, being the great offensive mind that he is, there's going to be some things that they're going to be able to find to have some success in. What kind of adjustments will Jim Knowles and that defense make? I agree with you on the part of this is where I have trouble seeing without a Quinn Ewers legacy game, where does Texas find ways to be able to score?
Yeah.
We saw how much they struggled in the first game against Georgia this year. As far as overall talent on a defense, Ohio State has more, but this is the better comparison. when Texas played Texas A&M, the talent that Texas A&M has on the defensive side of the ball. When they played against Georgia, the talent that Georgia has on the defensive side of the ball. This is the only thing, and then Ohio State's better than those two teams on the defensive side. We saw Texas struggle. And, dude, 2 years in a row, as good as an offensive mind that Sark is, Texas's woes, man, in the red zone is a problem. And I don't know how many times Texas will be able to be in the red zone, but to make it to the national championship game, for Texas to be in the national championship game, they've got to score 6 and punch it in the end zone instead of kick field goals.
Yeah, and we just talked about, Ohio State number 2 in red zone scoring defense. So that does not bode well for Texas. Like you mentioned with Quinn Ewers, when he's got the ball in his hands and he's going to make a play, he's going up against the number 1 pass defense and number 1 team in sack percentage. It's weird that Ohio State only has 9 interceptions on defense all year. So I know Ewers has kind of been prone to, make a couple mistakes here and there, like he did against A&M and whatnot, like he did against Georgia. We talked about it with Chris at all. In your opinion, do we see any of Arch Manning at all? Like we saw in that Georgia game, that first one, Sark was like, I need to do something to shake the team up because it's 23-0 right now. And he put in Arch Manning. Like, I don't know if we get to that point, but like, is this like, a situation where like a Nick Saban in the national championship game, like you got a good backup. Like, let's try the backup out if we're down early 14 points.
Yeah, I think that's the only way that we do see him. I think it has to be going bad for that to happen. I know Arch has played. He started a couple of games and when Quinn was out. But I think it has to be going really bad for them offensively for us to see that. It's obvious he wants to ride or die with Quinn. Obviously, Quinn made him look really good against Arizona State there in that second half where he made the plays there in the fourth quarter and in overtime like he did. So, again, this is just going to come down to Sark's teams. Texas has been this way. The games that they have either lost or drastically struggled in, Texas can't run the football. So, can they run the football? Chris talked about that too. Texas is going to have to be able to run the football with Wisner and Blue. That offensive line is going to have to be able to get a little bit of push. I don't know that they're going to be able to without help in the quarterback run game. But to your point, maybe we see a little bit of Arch to try to maybe keep him off balance a little bit with that. Yeah. No idea. And Texas is going to have to hit some explosive plays in the passing game. They're going to have to, which is obviously hard to do against Downs and Ransom back there at the safety positions for Ohio State. That's just what they're going to have to do on offense to be able to manufacture and score points in this game.
Yep. All right, let's get to game picks. I'm going to give out a best bet here. It's one I made last on New Year's Day. Watching that Oregon team with Dylan Gabriel and those receivers struggle to do anything on offense, and then watching Texas and kind of just they have the weapons, but they just haven't produced this year. And like we talked about Matthew Golden being their best receiver, he's a solid player, but he's not a Tez Johnson, anything like that. Quinn Ewers is a solid quarterback, but in my mind, he's not Dylan Gabriel. He's not accurate with the ball like Dylan Gabriel is. Ewers needs to play mistake-free football. They give the ball away 1.6 times per game, which is shocking for a team, in the top 5, top 10. We're talking about Notre Dame and Penn State taking the ball away that much and more. You're talking about giving the ball away that much. Penn State, or Texas on the penalties, they're 96th in the country in penalties per game, where Ohio State's 7th in the country, only averaging 4 penalties per game. I just think it's too much. It's too much for Texas to overcome with Ohio State. I know the spread is 6 right now. I got Ohio State at -5.5 on New Year's Day. That is the best bet. I would still take it at 6 because this does, in my opinion, this has a chance to be another one of those games where we see in the semifinals. We're to the Final Four. We've seen a lot of semifinal games in the college football playoff era. This has another opportunity to be just a ugly game where people are talking online. See, this is blah blah blah. This terrible product and just blowout. I don't know. I just think Ohio State's on a roll. I think they're playing too well. And we've been saying it for a couple weeks. If they bring that type of game, if they bring their A game, they're going to win the national championship. I think they can bring their A-, B+ game against Texas and win the game still. But I think they're going to continue playing that A game. I think they're going to win by more than a touchdown.
Yeah, I think that my game pick here, I think that if both teams play their A game, I think Ohio State's A game is better. Texas is going to have to be able to force a couple turnovers, maybe a sack fumble on Will Howard, interception type to get pressure. Defense is going to have to get pressure on Howard. Obviously, they're going to have to limit the explosive plays. They've been killing. They killed Tennessee and Oregon with the big plays. They're going to have to limit that. And on offense, they're going to have to hit explosive plays, and they need to be able to run the football. Again, I'm just of the belief that Texas has way, way, way too much talent across the board on both sides of the ball at every position group. Every position group, they do have a star. And I think they can play with Ohio State, and I think this is going to be a classic. I do. I think Texas has enough about them, and this coaching staff has enough about them. They're not going to just roll out there and just allow Ohio State just to blast them like they've done the first two games against Tennessee and Oregon. But at the end of the day, I just think that Ohio State, they're just too good along that defensive front right now. They're too good defensively. I think the matchup of the Texas offense versus the Ohio State defense, I think that's too much to overcome. I think it's going to be a really good football game, and I'm going to take Ohio State something like 27. I mean, I think it's going to be close to where that line is, like a 27-20 type game, 31-24 type game. I don't have a best bet in this one. I just think the Buckeyes get it done. They make it to the national championship game, and we have a classic on our hands in the Cotton Bowl.
Okay, that's it for us. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Appreciate Chris Vannini from The Athletic for joining on with us and talking some ball. As always, follow us on all the socials and follow us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. Subscribe, share with your friends. We appreciate it. We'll be back to recap these games later on in the week. And then after that, national championship. It's hard to believe we've only got 3 college football games left this year. So it went by fast. It went by super fun, though. So we'll be back soon.